So our study today is titled The Foundation of True Worship. We are continuing the three angels' messages. Now, people from every nation, kindred, tongue are commanded to worship the Creator. And this is not a command just for the Jews alone. Let's read Revelation 4, 6, and 7, which we are studying, and then we will start with our lesson. Revelation 14, 6, and 7.
Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water."
Okay. Now, this is the third imperative. An imperative is a command in the first angel's message that we are going to look at in our study today. The first was fear God. The second was give glory to him. So we studied that last week. And the third is, of course, worship him. And worship who? He who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Now, who was the creator? That is mentioned in this first angel's message, right? Let's go to Colossians 1, 15 to 17. And here it's speaking about Jesus. Notice what it says there. Colossians 1, verses 15 to 17.
He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist.
Now the expression in all things, the expression in all things consists, that it says in him all things consist. That means he holds creation together, right? In him everything is held together. It's Jesus who holds things together. That is the way that it's translated. For example, in the New International Version, he is the glue of creation. He's the one who keeps creation together. So the Bible is very clear that the creator who is mentioned in the first angel's message is none other than Jesus Christ himself. It's very clear, right? Now, why are we commanded to worship? Why does God give us this command to worship? Notice Psalms 95:6. Here is the motivation or the reason why Jesus calls us to worship. It says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, the Lord our Maker." Right? So we kneel before the Lord our Maker. And the motivation for worship is the fact that he is the creator and we are his creature. Worship is due from us because we were created by Jesus Christ. Now let's notice another verse that speaks about the motivation for worship, why we should be motivated to worship. It's found in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6. Now here Nehemiah, inspired by the Holy Spirit, let's listen to what he says.
Nehemiah 9:6. You alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all things on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you have preserved them all. Hold them all together. The host of heaven worships you.
Notice that it's a similar idea that we found in Colossians 1:6. He is he is also the preserver, or the one who holds everything together. So what is the motivation for worship? The fact that God alone is the Lord, and he made the heavens and everything that is in them. Now, if creation is the motivation for worship, then we must go back to creation story, right? Like, even in Fear God and even Give Glory, we went back to the Genesis, to the origin of where it began. So to understand the first angel's message, we have to go back to the story of creation. Why? Because the first angel's message says the reason why we are supposed to worship Jesus or God is because he's the creator. So obviously we need to go back to creation to look at and find more detail. So it's obvious that the first angel is sending us back to Genesis and the creation story. Now we cannot understand the first angel's message without going back to Genesis chapter 1 or Genesis chapter 2. So let's go back to Genesis 1:31 and we will read through Genesis chapter 2 verse 1. And notice as we read some interesting details that you find there. Genesis 1:31 to Genesis 2:1.
Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished.
Now, who created God, specifically Jesus. Now remember the word finish, right? What day did Jesus finish his work of creation? He finished it on the sixth day. Very important. The word finish and the day it was finished. So God made everything in 6 days. Who is doing the work? God. He finished his work at the end of the sixth day, right? So Jesus did the work. Did human beings do any work? No. Did Adam and Eve do any work? No. Right? So clearly, when God says everything that he made, and then says that he finished on the sixth day and saw it was good. It was his work that he had finished, and that was good. He had done the work. Now, this is the first 6 days of creation, and now let's talk about the seventh day of creation. Okay? Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3. Notice also some interesting things in these two verses, Genesis 2, 2 and 3.
Genesis 2, 2 to 3. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because made it holy, because he had rested in it. He rested from all his work which God had created and made.
Now God, notice, clearly the Bible tells us that Jesus is the one who was at creation, who created, right? God did all the work on the first 6 days. Did man do anything? No, man wasn't there to begin with on the first few days. He came into being in the latter part of the 6th day. Then God rested on the 7th day and then made it holy. Was this Jesus' week before it was man's week? Obviously, because it was Jesus who was working on in the first week. Notice another interesting detail in this passage. So, Jesus did all the work, then Jesus rested. And when the 7th day ended, Jesus blessed the 7th day and he sanctified, set apart the 7th day. Now, before he rested, at the beginning of the 7th day, that is at the sunset of the 6th day, the 7th day was not holy. That first 7th day was not holy. Why? Because we're going to find out. It became holy only after he had rested. That's what the Bible says. So to recap what we have just studied, Jesus created the first week. He worked 6. He rested on the 7th. This was, first of all, Jesus' week because he worked and he rested. Okay. Now he rested on the 7th day, and after he rested, while he was resting, the day wasn't holy. After he rested, he blessed the day and made it holy. Right? Why? The 7th day when it began wasn't holy, only after he rested that it was holy. Now, who made the 7th day holy? The Bible, these verses clearly tell us that Jesus rested upon it, and it was his rest. The fact that he rested, his rest that made it holy. That's very important. It was his rest that made the 7th day holy. Okay, that's clear. Now, let's go look at another verse that collaborates this idea that we just noted in Genesis, where it says that Jesus rested or God rested. And after he rested the whole day, then he blessed and sanctified the day. So let's go to the 4th commandment of God's holy law. And by the way, the first angel's message is referring with its language to Exodus 20 and the 4th commandment. Okay, 8 to 11. Now, note well that the 4th commandment of God's law is spoken with his own voice, and it is written with his own finger. So God himself speaks the commandments, and God himself writes it with his finger. So it's extremely important that we must listen, because it's God who is doing the speaking and God who is doing the writing of the 10 commandments, right? So let's read Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11.
Exodus chapter 20, verse 18 to 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. Nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in it, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
So now this is very clear that God or Jesus rested on the 7th day. And then after he rested, Jesus blessed the 7th day and made it holy. So this first week of the history of this world is what we will call God's week or Jesus' week. Okay? Now God's week before it becomes man's, because God is the one who is doing the work of creation. And God is the one who rested on the 7th day. The first week did not deal primarily with man. Okay? God, among other things, created the week by working 6 days and then by resting on the 7th day. Have you ever wondered, has it ever dawned on you, have you ever wondered why there was no direct command in the Genesis story for Adam and Eve to keep that first Sabbath? Have you ever wondered? There is nowhere that it says that Jesus tells them keep the Sabbath on that first day. Now, if you closely examine, a closer examination of the creation story, then we find why he did not command Adam and Eve to keep that first Sabbath. Now, here's the reason why. The reason is because God had to make it holy by his rest first. So like I said, when the day began at sunset on Friday, it was not holy, right? It became holy only after he had rested the full 24 hours of that Sabbath day, sunset on Friday to sunset Sabbath, right? And we had to make it holy first by his rest. He had to first rest to make it holy. So he had to do something that was rest to make the day holy. And then he would give the holy day to man. And then only he could give the holy day to man. That would be on the first day of the second week of this world's, the world. Okay. So we notice in scripture that the first 7th day did not become holy until it was over. Jesus didn't make the Sabbath holy until the day ended. So how could he tell Adam and Eve when the Sabbath was beginning, keep the Sabbath holy if it wasn't holy yet? It had to be holy, right? So the first day wasn't holy. First Sabbath of this earth's first week wasn't holy. It became holy only after Jesus had rested the full 24 hours. Now, furthermore, how could God tell Adam and Eve, keep the Sabbath and follow my example, or God's example or Jesus' example? Had Jesus not first given them an example of what the first week looked like, right? Further, and this is a very important point, the Sabbath that God commanded man to keep was not the first Sabbath of human history, but starting with the second Sabbath of human history, God told man, now from this point, you keep the Sabbath holy. Because the seventh day is holy. Why? Because he rested on the first Sabbath of the first week. Now, how is that? It's biblical and it's powerful, and it explains why God did not command Adam and Eve to keep the first Sabbath, but rather the second Sabbath. Now, taking us back to the fourth commandment that we just read, that is up on the screen. The fourth commandment makes the Sabbath a creation ordinance because it sends us back to creation. It explains why we keep Sabbath, and that is because of creation, remembrance of creation. Now, it's very interesting that what God says in the fourth commandment to man. What does he say to man? 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, right? And then on the 7th day is a Sabbath, and you rest. You rest on the 7th. Okay, that's very interesting. Now, when the first Sabbath came, that is the first week of this earth, and the first 7th day, the first 7th day came, had man worked 6 days? No, he had not worked, because he was created on the 6th day. So he had done no work actually. But, the 7th day was the first full day of his life, we could say that, right? So could he keep the commandments, the 10 commandments, technically, that says work 6 and then rest the 7th? No, he couldn't. He hadn't worked 6 for him to rest. Now, Jesus worked 6, he rested the 7th, and then the 4th commandment says that he told Adam and Eve, and all Adam and Eve's descendants, you and I, now, as you saw me work 6 days and rested on the 7th day, right? I set an example for you. Now you work 6 days and you rest the next 7. So when the second week of this earth's history began, the first full week for Adam, he said, okay, now Adam, you begin to work 6 days, and on the 7th day you rest, right? So Jesus made the Sabbath holy, and after he gave the example, then he gives the first commandment, which says, keep the Sabbath day holy now, because after I rested, the Sabbath is holy. Now on the second week, the Sabbath was holy because Jesus had rested on the first 7th day of this earth. He had rested on it and then made it holy and sanctified it. So after making this week and the Sabbath, Jesus gives them both to man. We know that in Luke 2:27. And we know that in Exodus 20:11. And it says, therefore, the Lord blessed the day and hallowed. Okay. So recapping what we just studied, he had to make it holy by his rest first, right? It was his rest that made the day holy. And then only he could give the holy day to man. Now, man could not keep it holy until Jesus made it holy. He could not follow an example until the example had been given. He could not keep the seventh day holy until he had worked 6 days. Okay? This underlines that the Sabbath is Jesus' Sabbath before it was given to man. And that is why it's called the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. Whose Sabbath was it? Jesus', because who was doing the resting there? Jesus. And Jesus calls it my holy day, because he's the one who made it holy by his rest. It is Jesus' day because he kept it first and it belongs to him. The week was created by Jesus and then the week was given to man after it was created by Jesus. Okay? Now, Seventh-day Adventists are not the only ones that believe that the Sabbath is a creation ordinance. Let's read a statement from an evangelical scholar. His name is Henry Murray. And this is what he says in his book, Biblical Creationism, page 62. The Lord himself had worked 6 days, then rested on the seventh, setting thereby a permanent pattern for the benefit of mankind. So we find here Jesus establishes a permanent pattern, right? For man to follow the same process or procedure as God. Okay, so Jesus said a permanent. Permanent is, it's not going to change. It's not a changeable one. It's not a temporary one, but a permanent one. So the Sabbath commandment says yes, because of the motivation for keeping the Sabbath is because of creation. So as soon as the first week ended, Jesus says to man, now you're going to work 6. The next 7th day, you're going to come and we're going to keep Sabbath the way you saw me keep Sabbath, the first Sabbath. And in this way, from then on, you're going to remember that I am the creator. Remember, Adam didn't see Jesus creating anything. Adam didn't even see Jesus creating Eve. So he had to take God's word. So then he said, this is for you to remember that I'm your creator. The Sabbath will be a sign that I am the creator. And you will remember it from now on. Right? From now on, when you keep the Sabbath, you will remember that I am the creator and I create. Now, incidentally, that's the reason why the 4th commandment begins by saying, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We remember the Sabbath, then we remember that God is the one who is the creator of us all. Now, the Sabbath became a sign and a reminder of the creator. Right? In fact, the Bible tells us that the Sabbath is a sign between God and his people. Let's read Exodus 31, verse 17.
Exodus 31:17. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed.
Okay. Now, it doesn't say exclusively for Israel, right? Because some say, well, that is for the children of Israel. But if you read the Bible, you know that the New Testament says that those who are Christ are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. You can read that in Galatians 3:20. So we become spiritual heirs of Abraham, and then we become spiritual Israel, right? And the sign for us is the Sabbath. Now, question: was the Sabbath a creation institution? It most certainly was a creation institution. It predates the Jews. Is Adam a Jew? No. Adam was the son of God. Remember, we studied that. It has nothing to do in its original intention with redemption at the cross, because the Sabbath was created in a perfect world. There was no sin when Sabbath was created. Later, it takes on a secondary function, but from the beginning, it points towards creation when it was given in a perfect world. So when the first angel's message tells us to worship the Creator, it is sending us back to Genesis, and we notice that the sign of the Creator is the observance of the 7th-day Sabbath. Now, can it be any other day? Did God rest on any other day? Did God rest on the first day? No, he was working. Did God rest on Wednesday? No, he was working. God only rested on the 7th day. That is why you cannot change the Sabbath to any other day, because then it won't be a sign of his rest. Sabbath was made holy because he rested. And on the first Sabbath, it was not holy until the end of the Sabbath after he had finished resting. Right? Remember that point very clearly. Now let's read a few more amazing statements from this author that we read, Henry Morris, who is an evangelical scholar. He passed in 2006. He was a staunch defender of the 6-day literal creation. He was the founder of the Institute of Creation Research in San Diego, California. Notice what he says about biblical creation in his books, Biblical Creation, page 61 and 62. The observance of the Sabbath, that is rest day, is not instituted by this commandment, for it had been practiced by mankind ever since the actual week of creation, when God blessed the 7th day, sanctified it, because he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Okay? Next one. Not only is there considerable evidence that Sabbath observance existed in both Israel and in other nations long before Moses, but the word of God makes it plain that it was established by God himself in the commemoration of his completion of creation, and that it has been observed as a special day, at least by some ever since. Okay. Now, another quotation from the same author. Very interesting. This is not a Seventh-day Adventist, it's a evangelical. With the passing of centuries, the Sabbath eventually became almost exclusively associated with the religious ceremonies of the nation of Israel, even though the Creator had hallowed it originally for all men. When the Creator eventually became man, however, in the person of Jesus Christ, he stressed that it had never been intended as a mere Jewish religious ritual, as the Pharisees had distorted it, but for the good of all men. And those amazing statements from an evangelical scholar who says that Sabbath is a creation institution and it was kept by the human race long before the existence of Moses or the existence of the written 10 Commandments. Okay? Now, let's talk about Israel's Redeemer. Right? Let's go to the Exodus of Israel from Egypt. Remember the sign that God gave to mark the Exodus from Egypt? It was the Passover, right? Now, who was it that delivered Israel from bondage that they were in Egypt and established the institution of the Passover? Let's go to Exodus chapter 3 and read verses 13 and 14. Now, this is happening, but we are reading now is happening at the burning bush. There's a majestic beast that has a majestic being that has come to speak to Moses. And I want you to notice the terminology that is used. Exodus 3, verses 13 and 14. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? Right? What shall I say to them? And then God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent you. Okay, so who appeared in the burning bush to speak to Moses? What was his name? His name was I am. And he says, I have been sent to deliver Israel from Egypt. Now, if you read Exodus 21, which is the preamble of the 10 Commandments, it says that I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Question. Who was the giver of the 10 commandments? It was the same one who appeared in the burning bush. How do we know this? Because at the burning bush, he says, I am going to deliver you. Then when the 10 commandments are given, he says, I am the one who delivered you. So clearly, it's the same heavenly being that spoke to Moses at the burning bush, that is, that gave the 10 commandments. Now, the question is, who was this that appeared in the burning bush who said, I am going to deliver you also and also give the 10 commandments? Let's go to find out who that was. Go to John 8, verses 58 to 59. Here Jesus is entertaining a conversation with the Jews. So let's read John 8, 58 to 59.
John 8, 58 to 59. Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Then they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them and so passed by.
So what was Jesus claiming when he said, before Abraham was, I am? He was saying, I am the one who appeared in the burning bush. Did the Jews know what he was claiming? That what he was claiming? We better believe it, right? Look what they did in verse 59. They took up stones to stone him because they thought he was blaspheming and calling himself the great I am. Who delivered Israel from Egypt then? Jesus. Who was the one who gave the 10 commandments? Jesus. Who was the one who created this world, worked 6 days and rested on the seventh, and by his rest made the Sabbath holy and then gave it to man along with the week? It was Jesus Christ. Okay? So the Sabbath belongs to Jesus. And he is the deliverer of Israel. Okay? And the creator is also the redeemer of Israel. Was that same person who came to deliver the human race from bondage? Let's find out who was Jesus the same person. Let's find out from John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, and then verse 14.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
Okay, so clearly the Bible clearly tells us that Jesus is our creator and Jesus is our redeemer. We don't have to have any doubts about it. The Bible is extremely clear. But now let's go and talk about the Passover lamb. Was Jesus the fulfillment of the Passover lamb? Absolutely. And so you have this unbroken chain of creation, redemption of Israel, and the redeemer of the human race being Jesus Christ. Now, if you examine the story of the Passover lamb, the Passover lamb needed to have two characteristics. First of all, the Passover lamb had to be perfect and without blemish, like that is physically perfect without blemish. And then when it was determined that the lamb was perfect and without blemish, that is, it didn't have any physical defects, the lamb was then sacrificed, right? Now, who was the perfect unblemished lamb? Jesus lived the perfect sinless life, and he bore a robe of perfection for you and me. And the moment he died on the cross, paying the penalty for our sins, he said something. Remember, I told you to remember the word, it is finished in creation. On the cross, he said, it is finished, just like he did at creation. The Passover has a much greater dimension to it than just sacrificing a lamb and eating bitter herbs and partaking of unleavened bread. Okay? The sign that Jesus gave to the Israelites were fulfilled in himself when he came to this world. But now we need to ask the question, what day and hour did Jesus die as the Passover lamb? The key question is, what day and hour did Jesus die, and what time did he say it is finished? For that, let's go to Matthew chapter 27 and we'll read verse 46. Notice, while you're reading, notice something very interesting. We're going to look at these, look at the last three sayings of Jesus on the cross. Let's see what Matthew 27 verse 46 says.
Matthew 27:46. And about the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Okay. Now it says about the ninth hour. Okay. It wasn't still the ninth hour because he still had some things to say, right, about the ninth hour. Now let's go to John 19 verse 30. Let's see what happens there. We're going to look at the connection. John 19 verse 30.
So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit.
Okay. Now, when you go to Luke, you discover he said something after he said it is finished. So let's read Luke 23:46. That's why you have to read the synoptic gospels to get the full story. So let's read Luke 23 verse 46.
Luke 23:46. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last.
Okay. Now, what hour of the day do you think Jesus breathed his last after saying it is finished? Exactly at the ninth hour. Now, the question is, what is the ninth hour? Now, Exodus 12:26. Remember, we are still dealing with the Sabbath. Exodus 12:6. This is some background speaking about the observance of the Passover. Let's see what Exodus 12:6 says.
Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight.
Okay, so it says kill the lamb at twilight. Now in Hebrew, it literally says between the two evenings. Do the Jews have two evenings? Absolutely, right? Now what were these two evenings? Now the first evening is when the sun reaches its meridian, that is 12, and it starts its downwards course. Now it comes to noon, 12 o'clock, and then it starts coming down, right? It starts coming down to sunset. That is the first evening, because it's now becoming evening. It starts its downward course. And by the way, we all know the sun doesn't, scientifically, the sun doesn't move. It's the earth that moves. But we're speaking in a manner of how we usually speak, right? It doesn't move. Now, when the sun reached its summit and begins its descent, that is when the afternoon begins. So afternoon, you get midday, and then afternoon begins when it passes midday, right? 12:01, 12:02. In other words, the first evening is when the sun begins to descend from its meridian, 12 noon onward. The second evening is when the sun actually sets at sundown, when the sun goes down at 6 something. Now the question is, what could be the between of these two evenings? Between the two evenings is called the ninth hour, and that would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as you and I know, as we call it. And 3 o'clock is when they crucify Jesus. The 6th hour would be noon, right? 6, 7, 8, 9. 9th hour would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So in other words, Jesus died at the precise moment that the Passover lamb was supposed to be sacrificed, at 12 o'clock on what the Christians today call Good Friday. Right? Now, let's read a passage in scripture that gives us the sequence of days of the Passion of Jesus. This shows us that Jesus died on Friday. He was buried in the tomb before sunset and remained in the tomb all of Sabbath, sunset to sunset. And he resurrected on the first week after the sun had set on Sabbath. Let's go to Luke 23 and read verses 54 to 56.
Luke 23, verses 54 to 56. That day was the preparation and the Sabbath drew near, and the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on Sabbath according to the commandments.
So now we know that he died at 3 in the afternoon, right? On the preparation day, right? Preparation day is Friday. Then Sabbath drew near. So had the Sabbath begun yet? No, it was still Friday, right? It was still Friday afternoon because Sabbath begins from sunset, right? What did the ladies do? They rested. Now let me ask you, was there any urgency to get the body of Jesus off the cross on Friday? Why was there an urgency to get it off the cross? Because he could not be on the cross on Sabbath. And that's a deeper intent than the legalism of the Jews, right? Them wanting to do what is right, but they killed him. We see that when the Sabbath began, Jesus had to be already prepared for burial, right? Like the Passover lamb, he had to be prepared. If it was killed, it had to be prepared. And then later on, probably at sundown, then they ate the Passover lamb. So you see, Jesus died at 3 o'clock. His body needed to be prepared in order to be buried so that his body would rest in the tomb the full 24 hours of the Sabbath. So in other words, Jesus did in redemption what he did at creation. On the cross, on the sixth day, he says, it is finished. Now we read the words, remember we read the words finished after the 6-day week. So Jesus says, I have bought back the human race. I have paid the price of redemption. And then he breathed his last and was put in the tomb, and he rested in the tomb the whole of Sabbath. What did Jesus do on the same Sabbath? If you go back to Exodus 16, we find out that there was a reason why Jesus had to remain in the tomb on Sabbath. Let's read Exodus 16, verse 19 and 20.
And Moses said, let no one leave any of it till morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning, and it breathed worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them.
Okay, so in other words, when the manna was picked up any day other than Friday for Sabbath, nobody was supposed to save any manna for the next day. What happened if they left it on another day except Friday for Sabbath? Two things happened. It bred worms and it stank, and Moses was angry with them. Now question, was this normal for bread? No. What happens with normal bread is if you leave it from one day to the next, nothing really happens. But even if you leave it for a week, it will just get moldy, right? You will get fungus coming on it and it gets moldy. But it doesn't breed worms or stink. What is it that breeds worms and stinks? It's flesh, decomposing flesh. Okay, remember that. Now notice what happened when the manna was picked up on Friday for the Sabbath. Let's read Exodus 16, verses 23 and 24. Okay, it says, then he said to them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. So they laid it up till morning as Moses commanded. And notice what happened. And it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. What was God trying to teach through the manna episode? Because the manna did not decompose when it was saved from Friday to Sabbath. Now, to answer this, we need to know what the manna represents. So for that, let's go to John chapter 6, verse 51. The key question is, what did the manna symbolize or represent? Right? Now, do not miss, this is a messianic prophecy, right? Do not miss this messianic dimension of the story of manna. God is not only trying to teach us that we are supposed to keep the Sabbath by the manna episode. He's trying to teach us that Jesus kept the Sabbath when he died on the cross and he rested in the tomb. His body saw no corruption. Here Jesus is speaking. So let's read John 6, verse 51.
I am the living bread, which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world.
Okay, so what does the manna represent? The manna represents the flesh of Jesus. Okay. Now, when Jesus rested in the tomb on that Sabbath, did his flesh see any decay or decomposition? No. Why? Why? Because Jesus was the living manna. It didn't see any decay. Now, why didn't the flesh of Jesus experience corruption? Notice the prophecy that we find in Psalm 16, 8 to 10. This is once again a messianic prophecy that the Bible teaches. Let's read Psalms chapter 16, verse 8 to 10.
I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, abandon me to the grave. Nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption.
Or decay, as the NIV says, right? So what happened when Jesus was put in the tomb? His body did not decay. It did not begin to decompose. What would have happened with a normal body? It would have begun the process of decomposition. But not the body of Jesus. Why didn't that happen? Because Jesus was the living manna. And when the manna was kept from on Friday to Sabbath, it did not decompose. It did not spoil. What God was trying to teach was that when Jesus rested in the tomb on Sabbath, the Sabbath of Exodus 16, his body would see no corruption because he was the living manna. The emphasis falls on the fact that he was going to rest on the Sabbath from the works of redemption, and his flesh would see no corruption. So the flesh of Jesus saw no corruption as he rested in the tomb on Sabbath. Why? Because he's the living manna. Explicitly said, my flesh shall rest in hope. In Psalms 16, verse 9. They were to rest in what Jesus had done. Notice the fulfillment of this as it is given in Acts 2, verses 25 to 27. Here, Psalm 16 that we just read is quoted, and this is Peter preaching on the day of Pentecost. Acts 2, 25 to 27.
Acts 2:31. Seeing what was ahead, he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned.
For David, Acts 2:25-27. For David says concerning him.
All right. But David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope, because you will not leave my soul in hate, not will you allow your Holy One to see corruption.
Okay. So here Jesus is saying, you will not leave me in the grave, nor will you allow your Holy One to decay. Okay. And then now read Acts 2:31.
Seeing what was ahead, he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the grave, nor did his body see decay.
So did Jesus do the same after he redeemed the human race as what he had done after creating the human race? He rested on the seventh day, the whole of the seventh day, because he was put in the tomb before Sabbath began, and he remained in the tomb all of Sabbath, right? Now, some Christians say, well, I prefer Sunday because Sunday was a happy day and Sabbath was a sad day. Now, it's amazing what kind of rational arguments people will come up with. The fact is that Sabbath should never have been a sad day, because Jesus had told them that he was going to when he was going to Jerusalem, that he was going to die, and he was going to resurrect on the third day. He had told them that clearly. If they had listened to him, that day would have been a day of glorious anticipation. They wouldn't have been able to wait till the time passed. They would have understood that Jesus on the sixth day had finished the work of redemption. They would have said, now he is resting in the tomb. He said he's going to resurrect tomorrow. That would have been a day of joyous anticipation. By the way, Sunday was not a happy day. That Sunday, the resurrection Sunday, was not a happy day, because the night of Sunday, the disciples didn't even believe that Jesus had resurrected. So how could they be happy? So we need to be careful with rational arguments that people provide. Now, if they had truly understood the manna episode, how they rested would have made it different. They would have been able to rest with joyful expectancy. They would have truly entered God's rest, and the Creator, Jesus. So this was Jesus' rest. And the problem is that they read the Old Testament without Jesus, without Christ in it. Now, let's go to some theories of evolution that have been embraced by the Roman Catholic Church as a church and by some Protestant evangelical scholars, and even, unfortunately, some teachers in our Seventh-day Adventist University. Let's read a statement from the Roman Catholic Catechism. This is the latest catechism of 1994, page 87. The catechism leaves the door open for evolution. Notice what it says. God himself created the visible world in all its richness, diversity, and order. Scripture presents the work of the Creator symbolically as a succession of 6 days of divine work, concluded by the rest of the seventh day. My emphasis is supplied, right? Notice the word symbolically, as a succession of 6 days of divine work. See, they are not saying it was literal, but they're saying it's symbolic. So they're leaving the door wide open for evolution. Do you know that Pope John Paul II, who was greatly admired all over the world, not only opened the door a little crack, he opened the door wide. In fact, notice he gave a speech on October 22nd, 1996 to the Pontifical Academy of Science, and this is what he said. It is indeed remarkable that this theory has been progressively accepted by researchers following the series of discoveries in various fields of knowledge. The convergence, neither sought nor fabricated, of the results of work that were conducted independently is in itself a significant argument in favor of this theory of evolution. Okay. So he opened the door. Now, let's read the newspaper column that speaks about this event. This speech that John Paul II gave, it's from the Chicago Tribunal, October 25, 1996. It says, in a major statement of the Roman Catholic Church's position on the theory of evolution, Pope John Paul II has proclaimed that the theory is more than just a hypothesis, that is evolution, right? And that evolution is compatible with the human faith. In a written message to the Pontifical Academy of Science, the Pope said, the theory of evolution has been buttressed by scientific studies and discoveries since Charles Darwin. If taken literally, the Bible's biblical view of the beginning of life and Darwin's scientific view would be irreconcilable. I hope I got that. In Genesis, the creation of the world and Adam, it's irreconcilable. Seems irreconcilable. In Genesis, the creation of the world and Adam, the first human, took 6 days. Evolution's process of genetic mutation and natural selection, the survival and proliferation of the fittest new species has taken billions of years according to scientists. Okay. Now, do you know that there are many evangelical scholars that are teaching the same thing? Renowned scholars, right? They're teaching this progressive creation, that God used evolution as his method of creation, and then there was death long before sin, that God used the process of evolution, survival of the fittest, and killing animals so that they could develop into a higher species, that is fittest, survival of the fittest. What kind of a God is a God who can't speak and things are done? Why does God have to use a process where there's death for millions of years before things come into existence? What kind of omnipotent God is that? I don't serve a God of that kind. I serve a God of perfection. I don't serve a God who uses systems of trial and error to eventually create the world. Many scholars, even in the Adventist church, are reinterpreting the days of creation as long periods of time, right? Many of our own scholars use the historical critical method. Some are even saying that Moses didn't write the book of Genesis, that it's the result of the work of several different authors. And they're saying that, yeah, Moses believed that the days of creation or whatever Genesis wrote, believed that the days of creation were literal days, but Moses was wrong because science has proved him wrong. That's their idea, right? And that's what they're sharing. Now, this, in spite of the fact that there are powerful biblical arguments to show that the days of creation were literal days. First of all, if you read the main Hebrew lexicon, which are the dictionaries of Hebrew, for example, Holiday's Hebrew lexicon, Brown, Driver, and Briggs, which is probably the most famous of Hebrew lexicons, they all say that Genesis, no matter what your interpretation is, they say that the author that wrote this believed that the days were literal 24-hour days. So you have, for example, the story of creation. It says evening and morning of the first day. The expression evening and morning shows that it is literal. Evening means when the sun goes down. Morning is when it's daylight, right? So furthermore, in the Old Testament, number with a numerical adjective is used, the word day. With a numerical adjective, it's used 150 times in the Old Testament. And every single time that the word day, yom, appears in a numerical adjective, it refers to a numerical 24-hour day. And then what do you do with the fourth commandment? The fourth commandment says, you work 6 and you rest the 7th. Because God works 6 and rests the 7th. So if we make the original days millions of years or millions of days, but what do you do with us following the example of creation? Can we work literal 6 million years? It breaks down, right? Now, if we are supposed to work literal 6 days and keep the Sabbath? It's because it's original. God worked 6 literal days and kept the Sabbath. Or else he would have been asking us to keep an impossibility to work 6 and then rest, right? It all boils down to whether you have faith or not. It's by faith that we believe. I personally choose to believe the story that God tells us in his holy word. Do you think the devil is able to shift things around on earth to make it appear that evolution is a plausible theory? You believe he can. And now as the time is getting shorter, he's coming out with new ideas for his theories. Okay, now the Sabbath is not only a commemoration of Jesus as creator, it's not only a commemoration of Jesus as the Redeemer, it's also a prophecy about the future rest that we will have in the kingdom, okay, to come. Notice Isaiah 66, verses 22 to 23.
Isaiah 66, 22 to 23. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your descendants and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord.
Okay, now better translation would be from one month to another, because the new moon marks the beginning of a month. So from one month to another. So Jesus created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. He redeemed the world, and on the 6th day he said, "It is finished," and rested in the tomb the whole of Sabbath. And it points forward to the future when after he makes a new heaven and a new earth, he will say, "It is finished," and he will rest with his people in the kingdom to come. Why does it say from one moon to another or from 1 month to another? Well, the reason is very simple. We are not only going to keep Sabbath in the earth made new, we are also going to go every month to eat from a peculiar tree. Let's read Revelation 22, verses 1 and 2.
And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month.
Okay, so we will be going every month. Now this is in the city, right? Going every month to eat from the tree of life, to refurbish our batteries, our life force. And why are we going from Sabbath to Sabbath? We are going from Sabbath to commemorate the new creation. There will be months in the new earth. So this must mean that there will also be days and years. What do we do with Revelation? Okay, this is another subject. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Revelation 21, 23, where it says, the city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is the light. Now, if you're going to keep Sabbath, there must be a week, right? If you come from Sabbath to Sabbath, there has to be a 7-day week. Now, if you're going to go from month to month, there must be months, right? And if there are months, there are going to be years. Now, Revelation 21:3 is talking not about the earth, it's talking about the city, right? Not about the rest of the earth, it's talking about the city. And it doesn't say that there is no sun or moon. It says there is no need for the sun or moon. Why is there no need? Because the glory of God illuminates, and the lamp is the light. The light is going to be so bright that even the sun shining in its full glory will be not seen. Like you use a torch, flashlight at 12 noon, Do you see the beam of the flashlight? No, because the sun is brighter. So just like that in heaven, God is going to be, the lamp is going to be there, God is going to be there, and God's glory, the light is going to be so great that the sun and the moon are not going to be noticed. Though they will be lighting, they will be eclipsed, they will not be seen as such, right? So that is what that verse means. Now, the final issue will be on worship, right? The final conflict in this world is going to be with worship. There are going to be two signs, the seal of God and the mark of the beast. One sign is a sign of worship to the Creator. The first angel says, worship him who made heaven and earth, the seas and the springs of water. You cannot speak about this without keeping his holy Sabbath. But there is another power known as the beast, and we're going to talk about that power later on. And there are going to be people in the world who are going to worship the beast, who obviously claims to be a counterfeit creator. And he doesn't claim to be a counterfeit, but he is a counterfeit creator. Now let's read Revelation 14, verses 9 and 10.
If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation.
Okay, so we find two powers vying for the loyalty of the human race. Two signs, one created by God before sin, and the other created by man after sin, right? Created after sin. The question is, which sign will we accept? The sign that God has established, or the sign that the beast has established as a sign of his power and authority? That's the decision that we must individually make. And I pray to the Lord that God will help us make the right decision.